Of all the movies that they could reference in this movie, I'm really shocked there isn't a reference to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. 'Cause I've got a golden ticket. I know it's not an action movie, but still. Hello guys and welcome to another Rewind review. In this video we're going to be taking a look at a movie that I have never seen before. It's a film that was released in 1993, stars Arnold Schwarzenegger. That movie is The Last Action Hero. Directed by John McTiernan and written by Zach Penn, Adam Leff, Shane Black and David Arnott, Last Action Hero sees a young movie fan transported into a fictional world via a magical ticket. But when a bad guy gains access to that magic, the young fan must team up with his favourite action movie character in order to stop him. The movie stars Arnold Schwarzenegger, Austin O'Brien, Mercedes Ruehl, Charles Dance, F. Murray Abraham, Tom Noonan, Robert Prosky, Frank McRae, Anthony Quinn, Art Carney and Ian McKellen. So yes, as I said, this is a movie that I have never seen before. I'm aware of the title, I've seen the posters for it, and it was definitely something that I was quite interested in seeing. I do enjoy a fun Arnie movie, plus the concepts around him, what the story was, did sound really interesting to me. So for its 30th anniversary I decided to check this movie out, and it was pretty fun. This is a really interesting idea and I think that it is a really fun concept with loads of potential. And considering this is going to be an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, there is definitely the potential for this movie to get very over the top and very crazy. And I would like to say that there is a really good story behind this, but it is more the concept than anything else. The story is very thin. Essentially the movie sees a kid who is a big fan of movies. He loves these big mad action movies, the ones starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he seems to spend most of his time at the cinema. And over this time the kid, called Danny, has developed a friendship with the concierge of this local cinema that he likes to visit. And it just so happens that on one particular day the fourth instalment of the Jack Slater franchise is due to be released, and the concierge has actually got a copy of the movie to be shown within the cinema. So he invites Danny along and gives him a special ticket that allows him to access movies. And while he's watching it, the ticket transports him into the film and he gets caught up in the story of that movie. And that's kind of where the majority of this story does take place, with Danny basically having to help out Jack Slater trying to defeat these evil bad guys that he's going up against, but it's all within context of that movie. But when one of the bad guys of the movie actually does gain access to the ticket, he is able to transport himself outside of the movie and into the real world to cause chaos. So both Danny and Jack Slater have to team up to try and find a way into the real world to stop that bad guy from doing everything that he wants to do. And that is a really fun idea. There is definitely a real sense of wish fulfillment in this movie. Like, how many people have watched a movie that they absolutely love with characters that they adore and thought, God, wouldn't it be great to team up with those characters? So there is definitely a lot of that wish fulfillment element that is in this, and it is used very well. But the overall concept of being able to go in and out of all these different movies, and the fact that you have a villain that wants to actually bring villains from other movies into the real world, I think is a really great idea. But the issue is they don't really do much of that. There is a scene really early on in the movie where you do have Danny watching an old black and white version of Hamlet, and he starts daydreaming and he pictures Arnold Schwarzenegger in this movie, and it's actually quite a funny sequence. So I started wondering if that was what the movie was going to be, with him and Jack basically going through all these different movies and all these different genres and them sort of interacting with those stories and characters. But no, majority of the movie does take place within the world of Jack Slater 4, to the point where by the time they actually get out into the real world, you don't really have a lot of time left. And when they are out in the real world and you see Charles Dance, who's playing the villain, is basically going over all these different movies, all these big Hollywood movie villains, and he's literally like circling them and he's like picking which ones that he'd like to team up with. I thought that was going to be going somewhere. I thought that would be a really great idea, seeing all these different classic villains all coming together. But again, they don't do that. There's only two other villains that do get brought into the real world. The first one is a villain that is from a previous Jack Slater movie. He's a character that you see early on in the film. You do see a little clip from the third instalment, and you see the sort of backstory that Jack Slater has with this character. So there is definitely a bit of an emotional story there with them. But then the other one is from a very unrelated movie altogether, in which it's just another black and white movie called A Touch of Death, and Ian McKellen happens to be this character, and Ian McKellen's character gets brought into the real world, but they don't do anything with him. He just sort of like shows up, there is a funny scene involving him, and that's really it. So as I said, the concept for this movie is really good, but they don't really do much with it. When it comes to the cast for this movie, there's some really big names involved in this one. The main character, Danny, is played by Austin O'Brien, and he's okay. You can definitely tell that he is having an absolute blast blast doing this movie. I mean, who wouldn't? You are teaming up with Arnold Schwarzenegger, getting up to a really crazy over the top adventure. But in terms of his performance overall, I don't think it's as good as I think it really could have been. This is a character who's getting caught up in some really insane situations, but he doesn't really seem to freak out that much. I get that he is fully aware that he is in a movie and he is sort of experiencing things as an audience member, but I do feel like maybe they could have done something to really sort of make it seem like, oh, he genuinely is in danger, and really drive that home with him. Because throughout this movie, majority of Danny's dialogue and most of the stuff that he's trying to do is convince Jack Slater that they are in a movie, and that's majority of what it is that he's trying to do. There's also a scene early on in the movie involving his mother, who actually does sort of give you an idea of what's happened with regards to their family in the past, with the way that Danny's father has supposedly died. But that's really all you sort of hear of it, and I feel like maybe that could have been something that could have tied into the story a little bit more, and the way that he sort of looks up to Jack Slater, maybe he sees him as a father figure, and that could tie into the plot in some way, and there could be a bit more of an emotional story between them. But that's not really there, and they don't really bring it up ever again. I thought maybe that might have been the idea of why it is that they bring in Jack Slater's daughter as early as they do, and I thought that she was going to have a bit more of a part to play in the story, but she only really has that one scene, that's it. So I do feel like they could have done a bit more with him. But when it comes to Arnie, I mean, this is Arnold Schwarzenegger. He is just an absolute joy to watch. I do like Arnie in a lot of his more serious stuff, but I really do enjoy it a lot more when he goes into the comedy mode. And this movie, he does balance that really well, and I feel like what they are trying to do with it is really clever, because this is basically like a self-parody in a way. I like that he does seem very comfortable in this movie to kind of make fun of a lot of the tropes and all the little cliches that kind of built up over his career with a lot of the movies that he has been in. To the point where there are entire scenes where he's like trying to sort of figure out like why it is that things happen the way that they do, and why Danny seems to know all this stuff about him, about what's going on within this situation that he's in. So he starts trying to catch him out, and he starts like trying to like say, haha, you didn't know I was going to say that, and then he starts saying like all his most iconic lines. He even says, I'll be back, and then he goes, haha, you didn't know I was going to say that. And he's, yes, we did. You always say that. It is a very self-aware movie, and I like that they really do lean into that as much as they can. But again, when it comes to Arnie, when it comes to his character, I do feel like there is definitely a lot left to be desired. I do feel like it is really fun seeing what it is that he does get up to and all the action stuff and things like that. But then at the same time, you have all the stuff where Jack Slater gets brought into the real world, and there are moments where that does sort of play on his mind and it does sort of come up, but they don't really do too much with it. Again, I feel like that is something that they really could have gone into a lot more. But in terms of Slater and Danny working together, I do think there is a good enough sort of partnership with them. They don't really get on as well as like Danny absolutely wants them to, because Slater does seem quite annoyed with him and he doesn't really know how to sort of think about Danny. I do like the relationship overall, but there's no denying that this is not John Connor in the T-800. And speaking of the T-800, that is a great segue. There are so many Terminator references in this movie. This came out a year after T2 Judgment Day. So there's a lot of little references to that movie. There's only a few that are very prominent, and the most prominent ones being Robert Patrick, who played the T-1000 in T2, actually does have a little cameo in this movie. It's a really funny little blink and you'll miss it scene. But my favourite one is when Danny is trying to convince Slater that they are part of a movie, that Arnold Schwarzenegger is the guy that plays Jack Slater, to go into a movie, Blockbusters, and there's a gigantic poster for T2 and the person playing the T-800 is Sylvester Stallone. That definitely got a chuckle out of me. And it's not limited to just those cameos. There are a lot of cameos in this movie, some really big names, some of who are uncredited. Like Danny DeVito actually does have a cameo in this movie, but you don't actually see him. He's just playing the voiceover of a cartoon cat. But even when it comes into the real world, there's a load of cameos from real people in this movie, some big action stars that you will know, and they do work very well. I do like how it is that they do fit in the movie. They do feel very naturally introduced, and I do like those scenes. There are a couple of other characters who are introduced in this movie that I do like Robert Prosky, who plays the cinema concierge. He is one of those actors that does pop up every now and again, and I do like him. He is a fun character in this, and I do think he is good overall. It is definitely a little bit questionable why he does invite Danny back to the cinema at midnight all on his own, but I do like that there is a friendship there, that there is definitely history between them, and I do like that he does play a role in this. He does have a part to play in the way that this movie does unfold. But my favourite character has got to be Decker, played by Frank McRae, who is just the police captain or chief who just screams every single line. And that's all he does, he just shouts at people to the point where he's shouting so loud that the glass door to his office ends up shattering at one point. I don't really understand why it is that he needed to do that throughout the entire movie, but it is just really funny. He's just kind of there just to kind of be an obstacle for Jack and Danny in their pursuit of the bad guys, but he is a really funny part in this movie, and I really love just how over the top his performance is. But this is an action movie, so we do need to have a bad guy. This is an American action movie, so of course we have English actor Charles Dance. He's playing a character called Benedict, who's basically like a character that is brought in as basically just like a mercenary to help out the main bad guy from the Jack Slater movie. He is the one who discovers what's going on, and he is the one who gains the ticket that gives him access to the real world. They have definitely gone a bit of a James Bond style villain henchman kind of direction with him, with the way that he does have a very distinctive visual look, and one of the things that he has is he has a glass eye that he changes in almost every scene. They don't really do an awful lot with him, but I do think Charles Dance is a great actor, and I think that he does look like he is having a load of fun in this movie. He plays things mostly calm, like he's not a like scenery chewing villain or anything like that. He's not over the top at all. He's probably the most subtle thing in this film, to be honest. But he does get a few good lines, and I do like that when he enters the real world, with the way that there is definitely a little bit of comedy that is injected into him, but it is mostly played straight. I think my favourite bit is when he actually realises that police don't show up after 5 seconds when somebody's been murdered, so he actually decides to have a little experiment of his own, and he just sort of like picks a random person. He goes, look, I want to test something out, shoots them, kills them, and then when he's done it, he's just shouting down the street, hello, I want to confess, I've just shot somebody on purpose. And somebody down the street starts shouting at him to shut up. It's dark, but I did find that funny. There is definitely a lot of potential for what they could have done with this villain, and what it is that he could have actually done within regards to the story, especially since he has the ticket. He is able to go into these other movies, or he is able to bring characters from those movies into the real world. And the issue is, because the movie spends so long in this Jack Slater movie, that by the time they actually get into the real world, there's not enough time for them to really do that, and it's really only towards the end that they actually get out into the real world. So yeah, just to reiterate, this does have a lot of wasted potential. I do feel like there is a really great idea here, and I really think that they could have done so much more with it. Part of me wonders if this movie could have been longer. I know that is definitely a cliched thing to say nowadays, with a lot of movies always feeling like they are really sort of crammed down, lots of stuff just sort of shoved in just to try and like pad things out as much as they can, but it just feels like everything's rushed. This movie does have a very similar feeling, but at the same time it still sort of takes its time enough to sort of like try and explore things as much as it can, but it spends so long on that first bit that when it gets up to the stuff that you really want to see, it doesn't really have enough time to do it. So I really feel like it could have been either longer or shorten the length of time that they spend in Jack Slater 4 and get them into the real world as early as they can, so they have more time and more freedom to explore this. And as I said, what you could do then is either have them going in and out of other movies, or you could have that be a part of the finale in which you can have all these different other characters making an appearance, or pay off what Benedict is actually trying to do and bring those villains from other movies into the real world, because he rattles off all these different big screen villains that I think could have been really fun to see in this movie, like Dracula from the 1992 movie, the Gary Oldman one. That could have been quite fun to see. King Kong, that could have been really fun to see. Years later we have movies like Space Jam, A New Legacy, where they're able to do this. I mean, it's not a good movie at all, but they do try and do that as much as they can. But then you have things like the Lego Batman movie, which really embraces that concept to the point where it is brilliant. And all the characters that they have in that movie, I mean, they're all admittedly Warner Brothers characters, because Warner Brothers can only ever advertise Warner Brothers characters, but they all work within the story, and I do like just what it is that they're able to do. It really feels like you are playing in this gigantic sandbox, and you are just going, right, let's just throw everything in there. And that is what you could have done with this movie, and I really feel like that is a very big wasted opportunity. But besides that, it's quite fun. This is just a straight up action movie. It is really big, it's really over the top, it feels like an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, but it has a lot of callbacks to other big action movies that were out around the time. I think Die Hard is definitely one that I did sort of pick up on. There's definitely a vibe to it early on. But then there's a load of other ones that do get referenced in this movie. This does feel like a movie that is fully aware of all the different action movies that you can have, and it sort of makes a point of sort of weaving those little references and cliches in and out. And I do think that the action sequences are really entertaining. It really does feel like a big over-the-top 80s action thriller that you would normally see with people like Schwarzenegger and Stallone and all those kind of guys. And there is some really creative stuff that they do get up to in this, especially since like these characters are very overpowers, like, even though they are supposed to be human, like the stuff that Arnie is able to do. I mean, it's the stuff that you would expect a guy like Arnie to do considering just how big he is, but at the same time they do push it as far as they can really go, and it is really fun. As I said, the cliches are weaved into this pretty well, and I do like how it is that they do address them, that they are aware of this stuff. It is a very self-aware movie, and I do feel like that does work to its advantage, and it does make this a lot more entertaining, especially that contrast when it is that they actually go into the real world, and then Arnie's trying to do all the things that he would normally do in all of his movies, and then he's suddenly realising that, oh, you can't actually do that. There's like a scene where he's like shooting at the back of the car and it just creates a load of bullet holes, and he's like, that's funny, that normally explodes. And then there's other scenes where he punches through a glass door and he's like, my hand hurts, I don't know why. I really do like how they do weave that stuff into it, because it does feel very within context of what it is that these characters are doing. I do think that it is quite funny overall. This does fit very comfortably in the action comedy genre. I do think that the action is pretty good overall, and I do think that the comedy is actually quite funny as well. I don't think all the jokes land. I definitely think that there are some that just aren't really that good, but I do think that overall, especially the more self-aware stuff and the stuff that you are probably more familiar with from all those big action movies, they will get a little chuckle out of you, especially with a few of the cameos and a few of the other things that they do throw in this. One of my favourite ones is the fact that this movie, as far as I'm aware, is a PG-13 in America. It's rated 15 for us, which I personally don't really see why, because there's nothing really that bad about it. But they make fun of the fact that you can't really say one specific swear word in this movie, so Danny actually writes it down, holds it up to Slater and basically says, say this, and he's like, why would I want to do that? And he's like, ha, you can't say that because this is a PG-13 movie. Now, it depends on which word it is. I'm guessing it's the F word, but if that is the case, then you technically can actually say it in a PG-13 movie. Only once though. But it is a funny scene. I do like how it is thrown in there. And as I said, going back to the action, I do think that it is good. It does feel like one of those big over-the-top 80s action movies. But I really do love the stunt work in this movie. Some really good stunts that you do incorporate into this that are really well executed. It is definitely obvious when it is that there's stunt doubles involved, or cranes and all sorts are involved, and just sort of like ways of sort of tricking you into thinking that things have worked. It doesn't always look like it has, but maybe it's not supposed to, I'm not quite sure. But the stuff that they do are really good, and I do like how they are used within this. Especially the car chase, I thought that was a really good scene. There's also a few effects that are thrown into this, and I feel like they are very 50-50. Some of them I do feel are a little bit dated, especially like a lot of the green screen sequences. But for the most part, it is kept as practical as it possibly can be, because, as I said, this is meant to be like one of those older action movies. But there are some effects that are incorporated into this that actually are still pretty good. As I said, there's a cartoon cat character that is in this. There's only one cartoon character, so I do feel like maybe they could have done a little bit more with not necessarily just him, but maybe others as well. As I said, you could have explored so many other movies, and I feel that could have been a really good way of doing that. But he does work within context of the movie, and it doesn't really look out of place. Like, there is definitely a Roger Rabbit style that they have gone with him. I don't really feel like they do too much with him. He's only in like 2 scenes, but it does look okay from what he is actually, whenever he is actually on screen. Admittedly, there are a few CG-esque scenes here and there that don't look absolutely amazing. Like, there's a scene where somebody throws an axe and it doesn't look great, but I don't think it's really supposed to. But the scene during the premiere of the Jack Slater movie, where Jack Slater meets Arnold Schwarzenegger, the real Arnold Schwarzenegger, that actually is pretty good, with the way that that is done with the 2 Arnies on screen and actually moving around and interacting with each other. There are movies that have come out this year, 2023. There's a movie that came out last week actually, The Flash, which features 2 characters played by the exact same person, and it doesn't really look as good. In fact, how they've done it in Last Action Hero is much better. And this movie is 30 years old. I'm not saying that every single sequence involving the two Barrys from The Flash are awful or anything like that, because there are some scenes that it does look really good, but comparing what they've done with that movie with deepfake technology and what they've done in this movie 30 years later, this one still looks good compared to the one that came out last week. And I'm definitely going to address those effects when I get around to reviewing The Flash. But back to this movie, as I says, some of the effects that they have included in this movie, like that two Arnie's moment, is pretty good. I don't think that every single thing does hold up, but I do think that because most of it is practical, it does work as well as it really can do. When it comes to the music for this movie from Michael Kamen, I actually do quite like this soundtrack. It's definitely up my street. I don't think it's very memorable very much, but I do think it does fit the movie. It's just straight up rock, and it really does suit what it is that this movie is, especially the Jack Slater movie, which it just completely dominates. Every scene involving Jack Slater, all the scenes in the movie, within the Jack Slater movie, does have that rock soundtrack in the background. And I really like how that's kind of played into the self-awareness as well, because like there are scenes where the characters do acknowledge the music playing in the background, where Danny actually does hear the music, and that's the thing that sort of like makes him go, wait, what's going on? But then when they get into the real world, Arnie is actually listening to other music for the first time ever. Like somebody actually puts on Mozart, and he's never heard it before, and he actually says that he quite likes it, and I like that idea. Because again, cliche in most of these big action movies, it's only the bad guys that ever listen to anything classical, so it makes sense that the main hero protagonist wouldn't have heard any of it. It is an okay soundtrack overall. It's not memorable, there's definitely no standouts. I do like the songs that they do incorporate in this. It is definitely a little bit generic as well, but as I said, I did like it. Overall, I think this movie is a really fun time. It really has a great concept and some brilliant ideas, but I do think that there is a lot of built up potential throughout this movie that is wasted. And I think it spends far too much time focusing on things that it doesn't really need to do. But outside that, the characters are fun. I don't think the performances are as good as they could have been, but I do think that the performers themselves do seem to be having a load of fun. It is an action movie, and if you are looking for something with a load of action in it, I think that you will have a really fun time with this, and I really would recommend checking it out. And at the same time, if you want a laugh, as I said, there is a lot of comedy in this movie. Some of it works, some of it doesn't, but I do think that you will find it mostly funny, so I do think that it is worth checking out for those reasons. I don't think this is one of Arnie's best movies, but I do think that this is entertaining overall, and I would recommend checking this out if you can. As I said earlier, it is only a PG-13 movie. I know it is rated 15 over here, but honestly I don't really see anything too wrong with it, so I do feel like people 12 years and older I think will have a really fun time with it, and I think that it is definitely a fun movie that I think most people can watch. So with all that being said, my rating for Last Action Hero is a 6 out of 10. It's not a fantastic movie overall, but I did have fun with it and I did enjoy it overall. Well, I think that is pretty much everything I want to say for this video. This actually feels like one of the shortest ones I've done in a while. If you have watched this video, thank you very much for watching. If you're enjoying this content, please like, please subscribe, hit the notification buttons to keep up to date on everything that's going on here. If you have seen Last Action Hero, let me know down in the comments what you think about it. Plus, if you have any suggestions for any future Rewind reviews you would like me to do, let me know. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Rewind Reviews. See you guys.
You strip the belt on and cut the toes like a take from you. I got the California razor cuts doing all me a bunch of the dirty hand freight. You know, you think about it, you married, you better get down the beach, go down the beach, you know.